Greetings, ladies and gentlemen. This is the Inept General, and welcome to our trailer breakdown and analysis of the Curse of the Vampire Coast DLC. We're going to be going through the DLC trailer and some of the stuff on Steam and the FAQ that was released, just to give ourselves a bit of information, and I'll just give you guys my thoughts on the DLC as it's coming up so far. So let's strap in and start to watch the trailer then, shall we, guys? Now, guys, I'm just going to talk over this trailer because I'm sure you guys have seen it by now. It came out a few days ago, so I'm not going to play it just in its silent form as I have done with some of my previous trailer breakdowns.
The tales we could tell.
And straight away, we have Harkin, one of the original vampires from all the way back in Lamia. Now, this guy's kind of interesting. We're just going to take a pause from the trailer here, guys, just give you a bit of background on Harkin. If you haven't seen it already, I do recommend you watch my Harkin video popping up in the top right-hand corner now. I've done a whole video on him and his army and where the inspiration for this army came from for Creative Assembly. But Harkin was one of the original vampires of Lamia, where vampirism first started, down in the area of the Tomb Kings, near where Khalida actually starts in the Mortal Empires campaign. Now, the issue is with him is that he was the harbour master, and as the vampires were kind of turning some of the most important people in the city, they ended up turning him as well. So that's where he comes from. He's truly one of the most ancient vampires, and I think the guy who turned him was Abarash, the very famous vampire who became head of the Blood Dragon bloodline of vampires. So really he comes from good vampire stock. So let's just keep going.
It started very poorly.
Now, to give you guys a bit of context about what I think is actually going on here, this is actually a very important start of the Harkin story, is that he eventually was being transported somewhere and his ship got attacked by Norscan pirates. He ended up washed ashore in Lustria, and he ended up going and coming across these artifacts, the lizard men, one of which adversely affected him and actually just drove him completely mad. And a lot of what his quest is in the lore of Warhammer Fantasy Battle is him actually trying to reclaim his sanity through finding lizard men items to try and restore the damage they did to his psyche to begin with. But he goes about it in a just completely nutty way. And that, I believe, is at least Creative Assembly's take on him being driven mad by the lizard men machines when he sort of first landed on the shores of Lustria.
I was one. But now we are many.
Now here when the cannons fire, I do wonder whether that will mean you'll get covering fire from cannons if you fight by a shore or on these island battles we can end up getting. Just a bit of food for thought there.
Sail the coast. Hunt down those lizard trinkets. And we will find them.
Now, these are great. This is a Mourngul, and these guys used to be devastating. They're a Forge World model, so they're not officially Games Workshop, but kind of are officially Games Workshop at the same time. So it's a very good sign for potentially Chaos Dwarves down the line. We're getting more Forge World models in the game, like we did with Mammoths in the Norscan campaign.
We will put ourselves back together.
Now we're starting to see a lot of troops in the background here. We saw them see animated hulks, which were part of the army initially. These are deck droppers, which are great because the bats live in the sails of these ships. The Mourngul, the animated hulks, as I said, the deck gunners, the carronades, I believe they were, and Queen Bess, which was taken from a massive ship cannon, a particular kind of Imperial ship that's basically made up of a single cannon from the Man of War game. And the idea is they stole one of them and just made it into a unique land weapon. Now, these are brilliant. These are wholly original as far as I'm aware, unless they're kind of Creative Assembly's take on rotting hulks. And of course, this big monster, which seems to be a big part of the story for the vampire counts. But all in all, that's pretty great. We've seen a lot of the troops there so far. So let's get into it in a little bit more detail. So rather than show off the freeze frames, I figured I'd show you guys some of the original models and as they were taken from the White Dwarf. So this was never an officially released Games Workshop Warhammer army. It's mainly based off a customized army that once appeared in an edition of White Dwarf, the Games Workshop magazine. And they're kind of great models, and as you guys know, I made a video about a year ago talking about this army, and it's just great to see them in action. Number one we saw in the trailer were these guys, the deck droppers. The idea is that fell bats kind of live on the rafters and ropes of any sort of these haunted ships with the vampire counts, and they come up and they pick up the zombies and they take them into battle. It's really a great little idea. One presumes these guys will be kind of hybrid melee flying fighting units. A bit of a strange all-rounder, probably jack of all trades, master of none. And of course, we also saw the Morngul make an appearance in that trailer. A horrific creature, could do lots of damage on tabletop. Now, it's said to be hovering between the living and the dead, and thus is also kind of ethereal. There was kind of a caveat for ethereal rules potentially for it in the tabletop. So they might get that trait, and it has a couple of other traits as well. Basically, which I think, as far as Total War Warhammer 2 is concerned, might equate to it having Stalk, as well as it having kind of a chilling effect like we've seen with some of the Norscan units. However, it's a bit weird that a kind of unit that's known in the lore to like sort of colder climates and only come down when there's been a snow avalanche or the temperatures really drop in the lowlands is just hang around on tropical beaches. But apart from that, it's a great unit to have, and I think we'll see it folded into the main Vampire Count army unit as well, because that's the part of the army it was originally a part of, not the sort of Vampire Coast army. So it's a bit of a surprise addition, but great to see it in the game. Another one of my favorites from the trailer were these guys, the animated Hulks. Now, they have a lot more sort of shellfish on them than this model made it out as having, but basically they're kind of like a hint at what Creative Assembly might do with ogres further down the line. But the idea being that not only human corpses are washed up in the ocean, but other corpses as well of larger creatures, and they go on to make up these animated Hulks, as we've seen in the game, sort of making those devastating charges. These guys will be kind of like trolls, I imagine, kind of minotaurs. They'll fill that kind of role in the army. We also saw a zombie gunnery mob, just zombies with guns. One has to hope they're not particularly accurate, just to be true to the lore, but there'll be a lot of them firing at you at once. Moving on from that, we saw the deck gunners and we saw the carronade. Deck gunners kind of a smaller missile unit, but we've seen them in there, and we've seen the carronade, which is kind of like a cannon, but I think they'll probably have shorter range in the game than your typical cannon. And imagine what we saw in terms of those large crabs. It seems like there's maybe two of the varieties of them. They will be the rotting leviathans, or at least based off them. The idea of these kind of monstrous sea creatures being brought back to life to serve at the whims of their necromancer master. Now, the Rotting Leviathan at first was meant to be kind of the biggest creature you'd get in the army, the idea being that it was a resurrected sea creature, but they seem to have shrunk these down in favor of going for some kind of animated ship monster, which is pretty great, if you ask me. It looks fantastic. I don't believe that ever made it into a White Dwarf. I might be wrong on that point. But as far as I was concerned, the Rotting Leviathan was meant to be the biggest creature. They seem to have downsized that a little bit to go even further with the sort of ship monster that we saw in the trailer. But looking forward to it. It's a great little army. Let's kind of flip the script over and go over to some of the information we got out of the Steam page, starting with some of the images we saw on Steam and what they teach us about the DLC. Now, the first one we see here is the close-up of Luthor Harkin. Now, not a lot of new information in this one that I could spot, short of that we do see in the foreground here a unit of what would be called in the original custom army scurvy dogs, but it looks like they just kind of reused the dire wolf model, and that seems to be what we're getting here. So, yeah, we're getting a quick sort of dog unit to chase down some missiles on your opposing army. Handy to have, but yeah, it just looks like dire wolves. And the scurvy dogs, it was debatable whether they're alive or dead in the lore anyway, so yeah, that's fine by me. So there they are in the corner there. The next image has actually caught a lot of people's imaginations. Now in the foreground here we have the animated Hulks that I spoke about, but it's really looking at the kind of ship, the Rotting Hulk ship, in the background there, and you have to look at the very top. Now, if we zoom in, you can see what people are talking about. We think that Creative Assembly might have actually shown off one of their legendary lords a little bit early. Now, if you zoom in here, you can clearly see this hatted guy with spikes and kind of a golden shimmering armor, and that looks a lot like one of the characters from a game they mentioned they took inspiration from when creating this DLC, known as Dreadfleet. Now, I've done a full video on Dreadfleet in terms of the characters involved and the special abilities their ships have. Do check that out. It'll be popping up in the top right hand corner now. But who this looks like is like a Count Noctilus. Now, he was also a vampire pirate who lived around the time, so it fit very nicely into the Vampire Coast lore as far as vampire pirates go. And he also had a sort of his own ship, and he was actually related to von Carstein. I think his name was Nicholas von Carstein or something like that, and he changed his name to Count Noctilus. And he is up there, and you can see if I put the image of him from the old Dreadfleet book up to this blown up character, you can see a lot of similarities, and I see where a lot of people are coming from. So it may very well be that this is a legendary lord, and he has one of these creatures as his mount. Now, I'm going to go into some of the potential legendary lords that haven't been officially revealed yet later on in the video, but that's what we sort of see in this image. Now, the alternative is that one of the hero units for this army, on the tabletop at least, was a unit just known as the Fleet Captain. So it could just be that they used the design from Count Noctilus just to create this generic Fleet Captain hero type. That's still a possibility, but you know, fingers crossed that we see this character appear in the game as well as one of the legendary lords, particularly with one of those monstrosities as his mount. That would be particularly awesome. So that's kind of the big one from this image. Next up, we have these sort of sea crab monsters. There seem to be two varieties here, a smaller kind of artillery type. As you can see, there's guys with kind of cannons on the back of these smaller blue ones, and a larger kind of arachnid spider-esque, heavy, more melee-looking type, although there do appear to be one or two pirates on the back of those, maybe firing off the odd rifle, or zombie pirates, shall I say, firing off the odd rifle. So that's about it for them. I mean, we saw them in the trailer. They eat guys quite a lot. It's a great little animation. And yeah, these are basically, I think, the interpretation of Creative Assembly of the Rotting Leviathans. Can't wait to get them into a battle. Next up, we have a unit that wasn't quite officially confirmed, but you could kind of assume was there from the trailer, and that is just the sort of hand weapon zombies, your standard zombie pirates. I think they were called just a zombie pirate mob before, as opposed to the gunnery mob. So this is them. They're in the game. They just have zombies with hand weapons. That's about it. Not much else to say on that. They're just there. Another unit confirmed for us in there. The next image does have a couple of surprises that we hadn't seen in the trailer, actually, and the first one is kind of in the middle of the image here. And these look like mortars to me. Now, they don't look like the carronades, as you can see in the top right-hand corner over there. They look like mortars, so it looks like this army is not only going to have cannon available, but also mortar available to it as well. The second thing is actually in the bottom left corner down here, and we see these kind of ethereal units that look a little bit like the Banshees. Now, I believe these are going to be called Sirens, or Sirens, as they're kind of spelt in the customized army, and they are kind of enchanting ethereal units that will be good in attack. Now, they're also a hero unit in the customized army, so I'm not sure if we'll get a kind of hero Siren and a unit of Sirens or something like that, but we'll have to wait and see. We do see that there is the ethereal unit there in the corner as well, so looking forward to seeing them in action and a few more details on them later on. Next up, we get our first look at the campaign mechanics for the Vampire Coast. Now, at the top of the page here, we see kind of the big lead up into what they'll be looking at in terms of their main driving force in the game. Now, what we're told is there are 3 verses of a sea shanty that need to be unlocked to reveal the location of something known as the Star Metal Harpoon, with which you kill this vast sea creature, which we saw in the trailer going around causing damage around the Warhammer world. That's kind of your aim as the Vampire Coast. Now, at the top of the screen, we see the 3 spaces for the 3 verses of this sea shanty that you need to collect to find the pieces of the Star Metal Harpoon. Now, the more infamy you build up by sort of conquering, building pirate coves, winning battles, the more you sort of progress through this chain. Now, at the top, we basically see the layout of the chain, and it's operating in a way that's not dissimilar to the way, if you remember, the Bretonnia campaign played out, if you ever got a chance to play that in Total War Warhammer 1, in that your actions basically slowly fill up a bar, and then maybe you have to do something at the end of your first bar. That's not what you have to do in Bretonnia, but it looks like what you might have to do here, like fight a battle once you get to each section of the bar as your infamy grows. And then you get a piece of the star metal harpoon. So it looks like that's going to be the main sort of building block, the main driving force, you killing this sea creature. Now, the next thing we're going to focus on is looking sort of down in the bottom right. We see the kind of map with a knife through it, as you kind of assume that's a treasure map icon. Now, that is the position for a lot of armies of where they get their magic items now. The dwarves have it as far as building runes, and the Tomb Kings have it as far as sort of collecting their secondary currency to buy magical items. It looks like the vampire coast even, is going to be very much the same, in that you have to find treasure, sort of get information to find treasure, to go and either collect the item, we don't know yet, or you'll just get it in your inventory straight away to give to one of your heroes or generals. That's what I'm guessing the treasure map functionality is there. We do get a little bit about it on the Steam page, but it basically just says that. Basically, you'll be go hunting for treasure, and I assume that treasure is magical items. So that's what that icon is. The next one across is the rituals icon, and we've seen this before in Total War Warhammer 2. This will be where you access your rituals, and they've mentioned a couple in the Steam page. One that makes enemy armies in your territory take attrition, and one that, like the Black Ark for the Dark Elves, or the unique units for other armies that you sometimes have to get through a ritual, the Queen Bess, the massive cannon that we saw in the trailer, is going to be a unique item that you unlock through doing a ritual. And the idea is that the Queen Bess is meant to be a very rare, very powerful item. So I agree with the way they kind of implement that in the game. So that's kind of what those things are there in the rituals. And then we're moving across to the next icon along, which seems to be your fleet officer positions. Now, this will work, I imagine, very much like it worked in the Empire campaign, where you just assign guys positions and you'll get bonuses based on where you've put them. Now, there is an added blurb on the Steam page about you should reward loyalty by giving them positions, so it's maybe like watch out if you give them the position and they turn against you. And it also means that loyalty, as we see it in the Dark Elf campaign, will be making a return to the Vampire Coast campaign, whereby you have to keep troops loyal to you, otherwise they might turn against you and start attacking you. So you might have to watch out for that happening. But that's one of the other elements. There are a couple of things in the campaign that's new that aren't necessarily addressed in this image. One of them is something called the Pieces of 8. Now, it seems like Regiments of Renown for the Vampire Coast is going to be treated more like magical items in maybe quest battles, in that you have to, it sounds like, collect these Pieces of 8 to get your Regiment of Renown. So it seems like there'll be a particular quest, almost like the monster hunting in Norska, where you have to do a battle to earn the Regiment of Renown. It sounds like there are 8 of these, so that you'll have to go through those to get the Regiment of Renown in your campaign, it sounds like. And the other thing that's not really shown in this image, I couldn't really see any icon for the town in the background, but is the idea of pirate coves. Now, I actually really like this idea. And it's something that I think really helps the idea of raiding armies thematically. And that's that if you take a city on the coast that you can build a port on, what you can do as the Vampire Coast is set up a system whereby you build a pirate cove. And now the enemy player can't get rid of this pirate cove, but what it will do is it will filter money into your economy every turn. So the more pirate coves, the more money you have, and it stops you from having to take it and defend it if you don't want to. And it allows you to kind of rampage around the world at will without worrying about expanding an empire. It's just like, look, I just want to rampage around the coast of Bretonnia, take every town I can and move on. And that's what this will allow you to do. It'll allow you to go in, either sack a town or build a pirate cove there, and then go off and just leave it to be. And there's nothing the other player can do about it. And unless another vampire player takes over the town or the town's destroyed, your pirate cove stays there. So there's no need to return. You can just continue on your merry journeys around the world, causing havoc whenever you like. And I really like this mechanic. We're yet to see how it plays out in practice, but I like the idea of it. I like that it solves solves some of the problems with raiding themed armies, and you always felt like, well, am I going to take this town or not? And then that's me more building an expanding empire than necessarily a raiding faction. So I like what they've done with that. And the other thing that they haven't really addressed on the campaign is, well, not really in the campaign thing, more of a battle-related thing, is there's a new law of magic we'll be getting as well. So we don't know what those spells will be like, so we have that to look forward to, and whether there'll be healing available for them as well. Now, the Vampire Coast, Luther Harkon is renowned for not being great at magic. Like, I think maybe his mental illness or the hard life he's lived has affected his magic in some way, but it just means that his magic is very different from that of other vampire counts. So I'm looking forward to what this Lore of the Deep looks like. But that's about it from the campaign. As you can see in the background, there's a flag back there for another faction. But what it seems like is going to happen with Legendary Lords is I don't think that's a different starting position for a Legendary Lord, because it sounds like from the Steam page, to get your Legendary Lords, you'll actually unlock them through technology, rather than having to have them in different starting positions. So it sounds like if you start your Legendary Lord, no matter where you start them, they'll be able to unlock all the other Legendary Lords without you having to consolidate any other armies, which is kind of a great thing to have in Total War Warhammer 2, where some of your Legendary Lords can be so spread out, particularly like if you look at something like the Skaven, it takes you most of the game to get there, and by the time you've got there to consolidate with the next Legendary Lord, they're probably a bit rubbish anyway, because they've been all AI set up. So I think that's a great solution to it, but it would mean that you're not going to bump into any other vampire sort of coast pirates in your playthrough, because they'll all technically be in your faction. Now, what I think this doesn't necessarily mean there's not more than one starting position. I just think that you will have different starting positions, but you'll always have the Vampire Coast, Legendary Lords within your faction, and you won't bump into them out in the world by themselves. So that's actually pretty interesting, and I kind of like the way, and I'm looking forward to seeing how that plays out, if it's actually the solution we've been waiting for this consolidation problem, if you just want to do one playthrough and get all the Legendary Lords from a faction on your side. So that's about it from this campaign image. Ranted on about the campaign there for a lot, but it gives us an idea of the image. So moving on to the last image we had on Steam. That's this one here, and we can see in the background really is these new kind of Grave Guard Halberdiers, which is a unique unit, and that seems like the main aspect there. But we also see in the unit cards some great designs there, but we see that there is that smaller artillery crab creature. Looks like there's 11 of them in a unit, potentially, and only one of the big, larger melee-focused ones. But we see sort of deck gunners there, all the units we've kind of talked about previously in the game. So having covered a lot of the units that are in the game, and by all means this roster is pretty full, there are one or two that are missing, so let's just go through them. Now bear in mind some of these might be added in later on, but at this stage I haven't seen them, I haven't noticed them in the trailers. But basically what we're looking at is, if we start with the heroes, we have the Fleet Captain, which I mentioned earlier, basically kind of melee, hybrid, potentially armed with a pistol hero. And then we have, after them, the Sirens. Now, the Sirens are kind of an ethereal unit, the idea that they sit on the shore, luring sailors to their death. They might be an option of a hero, but we've also seen a potential replacement for them on the battlefield earlier when I went through the images. The next unit we're kind of missing is something known as the Razor-Tooth Rats. This is the idea that these are the rats that live on these undead pirate ships, and they're so sick of eating dead flesh, as soon as they get ashore, they just hunger for living flesh and swarm all over the place trying to get it. Now, this model here, as I said, none of this army has ever really been officially modeled by Games Workshop. People just had to kind of make up their own stuff. So these are just giant rats from the Skaven army. Now, they don't have to be like the giant rats from the Skaven army. In fact, what I maybe see them doing is doing what they did for the Tomb Kings, whereas the idea of the Tomb Swarm, the spell or the ability, was that that's a swarm of insects that will crawl and are flesh-eating. You could maybe do the same for the Vampire Coast, making the Razor-Tooth Rat some kind of magical spell in the Lore of the Deep. That might be how we end up seeing them translated. And the other one I actually kind of liked was the idea of the bloated corpses. This is sort of corpses who've been floating in the ocean, they're filled with gases. Now what these guys would do, the idea was on the tabletop, is kind of run towards the enemy and explode, doing damage. and just completely annihilating themselves in the process. Now, there's not really a unit like that in Total War Warhammer, so it'd be very interesting to have kind of this suicidal, bloated corpse unit. It was kind of easy to recruit once you lost them, but just running around, just blowing themselves up is very much a kamikaze unit, saving them maybe for the right type of battle. But those are the ones that are only missing from the roster. Now, let's launch in some of the fun stuff, some wild speculation, shall we? And let's start with who the other 3 legendary lords could possibly be. And let's start with this image here. I've seen some people speculate that this, which you could get through the Total War Access page, was maybe Luther Harkon and the other legendary lords. Now, there are some aspects that maybe back up this argument. Now, before we launch into it, it's very important to understand in the FAQ, Creative Assembly really point out some of their inspiration for this DLC, and the army itself, as I said, was mainly backboned by a custom army laid out in an issue of White Dwarf, the Games Workshop magazine. Some of the other things have been filled in, and one of the inspirations they point out for this DLC is a game known as Dreadfleet. Now, as I mentioned earlier in this video, I've done a full episode about Dreadfleet and the characters in it. A lot of colorful characters who have a lot to do with the open oceans and the grand seas, so you could see how it fit nicely into this DLC. Now, in the actual game of Dreadfleet, all you have are hero ships, so there's not really a lot of inspiration we can see from the army list or any of the stuff so far, so we can maybe jump to the assumption that some of the upcoming legendary lords will be from that game. Now, thinking of that as a basis, I kind of use that to nail down some of the heroes, and it's maybe why some people have speculated about this image here, because there are maybe one character in here in particular that very much looks like a captain in the Dreadfleet game. Now, if you look at the woman just to the right of Luther Harkon there with the red bandana, that very much looks like Captain Arianna, I think it was Saltspite. Now, the idea with her is she was originally from the north, and she's basically a mutant. She's been mutated by the winds of magic, by the forces of chaos, and, or maybe not. So it's like kind of, she's stooped in mystery. Some have said that maybe she's a daughter of Manan, the empire god of the sea. But basically, she's a human pirate who's said to have had such badly mutated legs that she chopped them off herself and replaced them with, I think, stumps. I'm not actually sure what her legs are, sort of wooden peg legs. But she looks very much like the character in there. And there's another character in the lore of Luther Harkon that maybe could be argued is the character on the left-hand side of the previous image we saw. But in terms of Arianna, she's a captain in her own right, based out of Sartosa, but the issue is that maybe with her, she's not undead. She looks monstrous, I'll give you that, but she's not undead, and as such, like, maybe not the best fit for this army. But if you look at her color scheme, it looks very much like the Vampire Coast kind of coat of arms, very similar in that way. So they could end up using her also because I think she's one of only maybe 2, if not the only woman in the Dreadfleet game, so they might just be like, we need a female general in this faction, so they just threw her in a bit willy-nilly. Now, in the Steam page, they did mention that each captain, each legendary lord would have their own ship, which would act very much like a kind of unique ship, but act as a horde function as well. Now, all the Dreadfleet characters have their own ships. Arianna's is called the Swordfish, as you kind of see by the very aggressive front end of the ship there. It's very good for ramming things, one imagines. But what this opens up the possibility of doing is doing that each of the other legendary lords is some kind of hybrid, in that they can recruit different troops from different armies, allowing maybe Arianna to recruit some kind of Imperial unit to have on her crew, because she has this unique building, which is her ship, her unique ship that she takes to when she's at sea. So that could be a very interesting mechanic if they do that with all the legendary lords, and the Dreadfleet guys each have their own ship, which is maybe why they're good candidates to be these legendary lords. Now, the reason I say she's not necessarily a good fit is because there are so many other kind of undead-related characters, not only in Dreadfleet, but maybe around that could fit in. Now, let's address the character who, in the previous image, it could be maybe argued was just on the left-hand side of Luther Harkon here. Now, it's only because he has a hook for a hand. Apart from that, there's only been very few images of this guy that Games Workshop have ever done, but they've also been next to the Luther Harkon images that we kind of see now, the ones they used obviously as a model, and that is the character of Captain Decla. Now, he is only, I believe, written about in the end times. He's described as being Harkon's right-hand man, so it makes sense as one of the only few official characters ever discussed as being really part of Harkon's sort of zombie pirate army, that he'd maybe make an appearance in the game. Now, I'm not 100% sure if he has a ship, a particular name or anything like that, but he does make an appearance in the end times, be they accursed forever, as always. But yeah, so he's a character who could turn up, and there is the hook for the hand, so one could maybe make the argument that that looks like him, but I think more than likely that larger image is just generic characters rather than specific heroes. I don't think they'd release that before releasing the legendary lords. Now, if we assume that the people who just look like the characters in that image aren't the legendary lords, then who are kind of the front runners? And we're really looking at, we go back to that kind of leak, that image on Steam, and that might be, I believe, as we discussed before, Captain Noctilus and his legendary ship, the Bloody Reaver. Now, this guy's said to have discovered a kind of different dimension where all lost ships tend to end up, but that's kind of beside the point. I think they're going to skip over all of that. Now, I will say that blown-up image of the guy in that huge Leviathan does look pretty convincing with the bright red hat and the kind of the gold shiny armor as Captain Noctilus. So hopefully he seems the most likely at this point before the other two. They just happen to look the most like the ones in the image that we were given. So I think Captain Noctilus is probably a front runner, with people in Creative Assembly maybe not noticing he was up there, or maybe hiding him up there as a little show off. Again, I said there is a chance that it's just a fleet captain, but it does look a lot like the character. So I think he's probably a front runner as another kind of legendary arch-admiral, or something along those lines he calls himself, in the Warhammer world, also being a vampire pirate, and also opening up the possibility of him starting somewhere else as opposed to starting on the Vampire Coast as a different experience when going through the campaign. So that's Captain Noctilus, and there are a couple of other Dreadfleet captains on the sort of side of bad guy side, if we want to say, who do kind of fit the bill of the whole undead Vampire Coast theme. Most noticeably, much like Captain Decla is Harkon's right-hand man, Noctilus has a character by the name of Geist, who's this ethereal ghost, and he has this ethereal ghost ship. Now, as an army, you could argue that with his hybrid horde, he's really good at getting bonus to ethereal units. That could be one of the ways you distinguish his style of play. So a flying ghost ship is a fantastic thing that he has the ability to access, and another Dreadfleet guy with another very unique ship, very much related to the undead. So these guys are probably the sort of top picks, I would say, at the moment in terms of the potential other legendary lords. So I would say that if you're just going for the undead Vampire Coast theme, you have Harkon, you have Noctilus, you maybe have Decla, and you have Geist. Now, we talked about the Lady Captain Arianna Saltspite. But I think she might be added in, but it's a harder lean, you see what I mean? These guys are all directly related to the undead faction. They have ties to Nagash and vampirism and all that kind of good stuff, so they make a better fit. Now, there are a couple of maybe outsider bets along with the idea of Saltspite, and those are just two I'm going to mention sort of just in passing briefly to give you an idea of some other options we might have. And the first one of those is King Amenhotep. Now, he is a Tomb King, but admittedly, you know, still a tie to the undead there. He goes around with a ship that fires concentrated sunbeams at enemies. He's kind of a good guy, I believe, if I remember correctly, in the Dreadfleet game. So again, maybe not a perfect fit, but at least has that tie to undeath in the game. But this guy would make a good fit as well, kind of an outsider possibility. And the final outsider possibility is a guy by the name of Scretch Halfdead. Now, he was a Skaven fleet captain or ship captain who got swallowed by a massive Leviathan sea monster and ended up eating it from the inside out, so much so that they started to mechanicalize it, and they built this kind of a floating corpse ship of one of these massive sea monsters, which is very much seems in fitting with the theme of the Vampire Coast. If he can't necessarily raise the dead himself, the kind of idea of mechanized dead, but he's very much a bit of an outsider outside a shout. I think we have our favorites in terms of fitting them in with the Vampire Coast. We're looking forward to seeing which of these is confirmed. Let me know your thoughts down below, and if you want to hear more about the Dreadfully characters, as I said, do check out the video. There'll be a link below, and it'll be at the end of the video as well. Hope you guys enjoy that. But apart from that, we've just had a little bit more information that the vampire counts are going to get a bit of an update with some new mechanics and some revised skills and abilities, and we're going to get a new legendary lord for the Vortex campaign. That seems to imply that it will be a legendary lord for one of the starting 4 Warhammer races. Maybe a free legendary lord for the Dark Elves, I have to imagine, just to get their roster all the way up to I think to 4 at this stage it would be if you get another one in there. So that would be my guess, but I'm looking forward to seeing what they come out with there. Other than that, guys, as always, a huge thank you all for watching. And yeah, I'm pretty excited for this DLC. I'm looking forward to seeing what the heroes look like and who the other legendary lords are, probably most of all. But until then, guys, I'll catch you on the next one.